Jeff, you know where we're starting with you this week. You reported yesterday, and we'll give Jeff credit. We've asked him almost every single week for the last month, Jeff, is McDaniels on the hot seat? And he'd say, no, he's not going anywhere. Well,
he's been steadfast.
Yes, you reported yesterday, Jeff, that McDaniels has been given assurances he'll be back in 2023. Let the people know what you've learned talking to the franchise and those that are in Vegas right now about McDaniels' future.
It's really just a reinforcement of everything we've been talking about. When Mark Davis hired the Ziegler-McDaniels ticket, this was with a long-term view in mind. Now, obviously, when things go south or expectations are not met right off the bat, the coach is the one who's going to come under fire more immediately than the GM, which is, I think, why there's been so much public speculation on McDaniels here. But I think, really, it's sort of low-hanging fruit. And because of the way things ended in Denver, because he is a former Belichick assistant, everybody sort of just looks at that and says it's more of when than if. And because the record isn't where a lot of people expected it to be, I think people are just rushing to can McDaniels. And that just, quite frankly, has not been Mark Davis's approach when he hired these two guys. He wants them in town to implement their system for a long-term process. Now, how long-term, we'll see. I don't know what 2023 is going to look like. But, 2-7, nobody could have predicted this. I think if you take like a 30,000-foot view and you take a step back and you read some of the things that we in the media probably missed in the offseason, I've been thinking a lot over the last couple of days when I was talking to Dave Ziegler. And one of the first thing I asked him in July was, something about his aggressive offseason. And he mentioned, well, yeah, it looks aggressive because they made that trade for Devontae Adams and they locked up some of their core guys. But other than that, look at the rest of the people or the contracts they brought in. They were minimal level deals. This is still a team that was in a transition period with the books and trying to usher in a new generation, which is going to be something that was going to take time. And I think obviously nobody thought 2-7, but I think with the way last season ended, that was really a lightning in a bottle type of situation. They overachieved. They got a lot of good breaks. They got into the playoffs. I was guilty of assuming that the Raiders were going to pick up where they left off, but that momentum sort of self-corrects a lot of times in the following year, especially when the offensive line isn't good enough. You've seen what happened with the Rams. They don't have a good offensive line. All of a sudden, the defending Super Bowl champions have become an afterthought. That's certainly been the case with O-line inconsistencies in New England this season. It's hard to win games when your offensive line isn't playing well enough. And their defense, I think we all should have known that they were going to struggle. I don't think anybody could have predicted, or maybe people did out there. I certainly didn't predict that the defense was going to be as awful as they have been.
They're talking about the long process now and building, and that's always, I think, got to be one of the focuses of a front office and ownership. But before the season started, were they talking about a long process and building, or were they pretty excited about what they had and what it could do right now?
No, they really were. And that's why I've been so steadfast in saying that, I didn't think McDaniels was ever going to be on the hot seat, because they did have this long-term vision. And Mark Davis has seen the perils of having a one-and-done coach. It's really, really hard to keep your organization from stunting its growth when you have that one-and-done or those two-and-done type of situations as head coach. The ongoing turnover doesn't create any consistency. It's hard to get anything built. Now, the other side of that is, I go back to actually Bill Belichick saying 10-plus years ago, he was kind of reflecting on the early part of his career in New England. And he started 5-13, including the 2 losses in 2001. And Kraft stuck with him. And obviously, things turned around way faster than anybody could have ever imagined. And I'm not saying that's going to happen with McDaniels, or even that example is worth holding, up the standard of other coaches. But what I'm getting at is Belichick said that even though things were going really well, they won the Super Bowl in 2001, 2002 they took a step back, but it really wasn't until 2003 when he had his players and his system in place to do what he really wanted to do. That was the start of his 4th season. Now, unfortunately, some 20 years later in the NFL, you don't always get 4 seasons.
Right.
And I don't know if that's going to be the case with McDaniels, but it is a reality that if you want to give your head coach enough time to put his system in place, it takes a whole hell of a lot more than 9 games.
Jeff Howe with us from The Athletic. He is on the Folsom Lake Honda hotline. Folsom Lake Honda, your one-stop Honda shop. Jeff, if McDaniels is back, and your reporting says he will be, does Derek Carr return with him?
I don't have the answer to that one. And I think that should be something where they continue to evaluate the situation because, we've talked about it. That's a contract that you can get out from underneath if you need to. And there are going to be potentially big names, certainly guys with ties to McDaniels, and Tom Brady, a big one, and Jimmy Garoppolo. If you want to go in a different direction, that's, it's certainly a possibility. The other side of that is, you're looking right now like the number 2 or number 3 pick in the draft. So you could have a chance to get C.J. Stroud or Bryce Young. So, maybe do you want one of those guys starting right off the bat in 2023? I don't know. I don't know if anybody knows the answer to that right yet. But, there's a lot of stuff that they should continue to monitor this situation because I don't think they need to come up with that answer right now.
I want to shift gears and talk about the 49ers. And you mentioned Jimmy Garoppolo as a potential option for the Raiders. He's been efficient. He's been solid. But I think Sunday, a lot of 49ers fans were watching that and expecting an explosive attack with the full arsenal of weapons at Jimmy and Kyle Shanahan's disposal. Is that fair to be disappointed with the win, or do you think 49ers fans should just be counting their W's and their blessings right now?
I actually thought I'm sounding pro former Patriots regime guys here, and I'm not trying to, but I thought Garoppolo threw the ball pretty well the other night, and it was kind of the running game that held them back, which was odd, considering what the 49ers are built to do. Again, I keep going back to Garoppolo didn't have the offseason. You've had so many injuries. You started with Trey Lance. George Kittle gets hurt. Week 1? I think Debo's down for a week or two, whatever that was. McCaffrey comes in on the fly. A lot of this team's offensive inconsistencies are just because these guys haven't had a lot of time together. And I think when you see them kind of struggle or sputter for stretches in games, I guess if you want to paint the rosy pictures, the more time these guys have together, the more reason you have to believe that this team is going to start to hit its peak in late November or into December, which is a great thing. That's what every team wants to have. But, again, the offensive struggles, even some of the defensive incontinuity because of the injuries and stuff, it looks like a team that needed more of a training camp together, and you just can't make up for that time.
Jeff, we appreciate you, man. We'll catch up with you next week, my friend.
Of course. Thanks, guys. Have a great week.
Thank you. You too.